Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. And wanted to start off just saying thank you to the sponsors and the organizers for today. What a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and network and, explore new ideas together. So I'm going to try to start out with this handheld mic. And if you're having trouble hearing me, please do let me know so that I can maybe head over to that one. I tend to wander. So our conversation, the conversation I'd like to have with you today is around organizational agility, the importance of being fast, being flexible. And as we talk about this topic today, one of the things that I'd like us to be exploring together is, well, what's the role then of project initiatives and change initiatives in helping to move our organizations toward a culture of greater agility? And so that's what we will explore together, because I truly believe that you as project managers and people on project teams have a huge and important role to play in helping to shift a culture. So as Mike said, my background, I started my career in healthcare, and I was involved in roles related to organizational development, quality improvement, learning, and really my whole career has been spent in helping organizations and people and teams to learn and evolve and move forward. So I'll use some of that experience as we talk about this topic today, and I'll invite you to reflect on your setting, because what's most important to me is that some of what we talk about you can walk away with and use in your own environment. So these are the things that we'll be exploring together. We're going to talk a bit about, why is organizational agility important and who believes it is important. We'll take a look at how do we make our cultures visible. So the current state of where you are in your teams and organizations, how do we make it visible? We'll explore some of the things that we can do that can help us to change and shift the culture. As I said, I truly believe project teams and project managers are core and key to helping to make this happen. And I'll close with some examples in action, some ways in which organizations have tried to make this journey with teaming being a part of it. So, sound good? That's what we're going to talk about. So before I start talking, I want you to think about your organization. So the organization, the main organization that you're a part of right now, I'd like you to write down 3 to 5 words that describe that organization's culture. So go ahead, just jot that down, and I'll ask those who are brave to maybe share 1 or more of their words, depending on who's sitting beside you, right? And I'm not talking about the values you have written on the wall. I'm talking about the behaviors. So the real culture, the real way that people treat each other and get work done in the organization. So 3 to 5 words about that. So who would like to share an example of one of the words for your culture? Yes?
Divisions.
Divisions. Okay, so divisions. An alien coming into that organization looking would quickly see there are divisions. Okay, good. Division. Yes? Top down. Okay, top down. Probably a few of you can relate to that. Yes? Competitive. Okay, so we have a culture of competition. It's we want stars. We want people to be leaders of the pack. And so competitive. What else? Any other examples of? Yes? Risk averse. Okay, so risk averse. We're going to be talking about organizational agility. How does a culture that is risk averse begin to make the journey toward more agility? Great. Okay, so I have water, I have a clicker, and I have a mic. So time to switch. Now, The slide looks a little bit the same, but it has a slightly different shade of blue. Now I want you to think about a current team that you are a part of. So we're now narrowing in your sphere of influence a little bit more. A current team that you're a part of, 3 to 5 words that would describe the culture of that team. Yes? Collaborative. Collaborative. Okay, awesome. Dysfunctional. Uh-oh. Are you here on your own, or did you bring your team? You're on your own. Okay, okay. Cross-functional. Cross-functional, okay. Lots of power in that, right? Lots of power in that. Other words, yeah? Pardon? Eager, wonderful, right? Energy, eager, we want to grow, we want to change, we want to make things happen. Other words? Yes? Innovative, awesome. And right in front of him? Supportive. So now we're starting, yeah, another one? Hesitant, yeah. Ties back to that risk-averse one that we heard about at the organizational level. And maybe a hesitant team is part of an organizational culture that is risk-averse. So the reason I ask you this is because that's your greatest sphere of influence, right? The team that you are working on is your greatest sphere of influence. And so the more we can be intentional about how we want to shift a particular team, the greater chance we have of helping ultimately to make some shifts to the overall organizational culture. So I'm going to have you reflect back on these words that you selected for your team and your organization as we move through the rest of this conversation together. So first, a little bit, let's take it outside of your sphere of influence, and let's talk a bit about what's happening in the world around us and why does organizational agility even matter? So this was a survey conducted by McKinsey, a global survey. 2017 was the year in which this was published. More than 2,500 responses, range of regions, industries, levels of the organization, tenure within the organization. And what they found in that survey is that 3/4 of the respondents believed and stated that organizational agility was either a top or a top 3 priority for that organization, for theirs. 2/3 of them said, we're in a sector that is undergoing rapid change and disruption and transformation. And 1/3 of them had already indicated that they have some kind of an agile transformation underway. So they were trying to get faster and better at both reading and responding to the environment, making decisions more quickly, all of those things. And what they found is, of that 1/3 who stated that they had agile transformation in progress, that typically those were coming from organizations that reported that they were in a very highly unstable environment. So telecommunications, financial services, pharmaceuticals, media, those were the sorts of organizations that already had something underway. A second one that's a little more recent, so 2019 is when this was published, and this was a global CEO outlook. So these were CEOs, about 1,300 responded to this survey, again, very diverse in terms of the representation. And 2/3 of them said that acting with agility is the new currency of business, and without it, if we aren't able to, we may in fact risk bankruptcy as an organization. So they were recognizing what was happening within the world around them and realizing that this is no longer a nice to have, that we really do need to become more agile as organizations. And between 8 and 9 and in 10 of them also suggested that they want a culture that embraces errors and mistakes. Is that how it feels when we have our CEO walk in a room? I'm wondering, who were these CEOs anyway, right? Because it often doesn't feel in the real culture like that is actually valued. But that's what they said in the survey. So they want a culture where errors and mistakes are valued and are a part of it. And again, that's a culture where agility is a part of how they work. So they saw the importance of innovation. And this last one was from the 13th Annual State of Agile report. Again, approximately 1,300 responses. And you'll notice, you may not be able to read this, so I'll read the top 3 responses which were cited as challenges or barriers to adopting Agile practices. So now we're talking big A Agile practices versus small a organizational agility. What they said were the biggest barriers, the number 1, organizational culture is at odds with Agile values. Second, a general organizational resistance to change. Third, inadequate management support and sponsorship. And then down the second from the bottom is minimal collaboration and knowledge sharing, which I would argue is also a reflection of culture. So 4 of the biggest challenges listed here are things that have to do with the culture, and it's perhaps inability or slowness in accepting this idea that we need to be faster, we need to be more flexible. Of course, I'm sure most of us have heard the term VUCA. As you may know, it was originally in the early 90s is when it became a term, or when it was coined, I guess, as a term by the US Army initially. And so VUCA stands for these 4 characteristics of how it feels really in many of our worlds today. So the first one is volatility. We're living in a world where the speed of change feels like it's continually increasing, right? Things are moving around us at a very high rate in many or most industries. The second is uncertainty. It's harder and harder to predict the future. Remember the days of creating a strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years, and the plan would stay fairly stable over that period? Those days aren't here anymore. So it's hard to predict, so we need to be continuously monitoring. Complexity. So there's multiple factors that are influencing the success of anything. And not only is it hard to even know what all those factors are and who all the stakeholders are, but it's really hard to understand how the interrelationships work. So we have to often act without as much awareness as we might like to have. And then the last one is ambiguity, which is, again, acting within, conditions of uncertainty, having to make a decision without all of the facts, without all of the information, and having things look very foggy in terms of what's going to happen if I take this action versus that action. So that's our world, and that's another of the reasons why organizational agility is so key. We really need to be getting better and better at being faster while still being smart about what we do. And this, again, when I added this quote, I thought, I wonder when he actually said that, because I've seen this quote so many times. It was actually the 2000 GE annual report when Jack Welch said that. So almost 20 years ago, he said, when the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. And then he had another sentence, which is, it's only a matter of when, right? It's only a matter again. So agility today, I think, is, in fact, a business imperative. So how many of you are in an organization that is putting energy and effort toward transforming the culture of the organization? Okay, so I see, yeah, awesome, right? So there's some intention and some energy already in place behind that. which is a huge asset, right? Because we know change often needs that impetus from the organizational top level. So what I've tried to depict here is how when we're looking to change culture, on the left side, what I'm trying to communicate there is we can choose a more incremental type approach where we're shifting and we're just working our way bit by bit to try to improve the way people are behaving with each other and making decisions and all of that. And then on the right, I tried to say with those two pictures that sometimes, you know, we want to try to just get rid of the old and, you know, embrace the new and try to really be radically different. Obviously, both are hard. I think the one on the right is even harder. And you would really need a really, really strong reason and impetus to be wanting to have that happen. Sometimes it could be perhaps a merger type situation or an acquisition type situation where that approach might be the one that's selected as a way to go. Okay, so when we think about this idea of transforming anything, it can sometimes feel a little bit like this. So how does a slide like that, how does a picture like that make you feel? What are the emotions that come to you looking at that? Danger, okay, danger. What else? Risk. Exhilarating, exciting, yay, I heard those at the same time, right? Like, it's a leap into the future. It's exciting, it's exhilarating. What else? Yeah. Oh, I'm missing, where'd that come from? Surviving, right, right. Like jumping, there's survival, Escaping. Yeah, but you know what they say, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side, and actually it isn't. Yeah, there's just new kinds of problems, right? So yeah, exciting, exhilarating, scary, frightening. It's hard. What's that?
So what's going on is happening all over my head.
Yes. Yeah, where you're feeling like I need to be jumping from here to there and all over. Yeah. And the thing that's different about this and culture change is this person, in a flash, he's from here to there. In a flash, he is, right? Culture change? Not so much, right? It takes time. It takes time for us to have culture and many, many moving parts and people. It's about people changing behaviors. So it's all of the conversations that need to happen preparing someone for something like that. And helping them to see that it's going to be okay and you can make the leap, you can make the jump and you'll be successful. The safety, right? Like how are we making it safe for this person to take that leap of trying these new behaviors and new approaches in their work with each other? So why do I believe, and I hope you believe, that project teams and change-related initiatives and projects are an ideal and important vehicle for accelerating a culture toward agility or any kind of cultural change? Why? Why are they ideal? Okay, they are able to set examples. Why else?
Prove success.
Yeah, they can prove success. It's a testing ground. It's a ground for experimentation. Yeah.
They're cross-functional. They're able to influence different levels of the organization all at the same time.
Totally, right? Totally. She said if they're cross-functional, which many are, they're able to influence and, I like to say, infiltrate different parts of the organization all at the same time, right? That's the reason we're in the room, both us as a project manager and the others who are there with us. That's the reason we're in the room.
The other one is they're focused with a single goal in mind. So they're all working towards the same goal. They're rowing in the same direction.
Yes, so he mentioned they're focused with the same goal in mind. They're all rowing in the same direction. So again, there's a power in that, right? There's an energy in that that helps them to be able to make a difference in a very powerful and meaningful way. So yeah, I think those are some of the core reasons why project teams, they're the ones who this is a place where we can begin to cultivate and ultimately accelerate culture change within an organization. One of the things that happens with successful, effective teams is they set norms, right? They talk about how are we going to work together. They set norms of behavior, and culture is all about behavior. So if we're setting intentional norms, how do we build in norms that relate to the bigger picture of agility on an ongoing basis in all functions of the organization? So project teams are often also very strategic, right? Like you have a project because you're trying to move the organization into some form of a new direction. So again, that strategic nature of it, I believe, also makes it an ideal breeding ground for helping to both test and ultimately strengthen changes to culture. So seeing culture, I asked you to describe your culture in 3 to 5 words. And so how would you define what culture is in your own words? How would you define it? How do we know what a culture is? Yeah.
I'd say it was the mores of the organization.
Okay, so the mores of the organization, the mores or norms of the organization. Great. How else might people define it? Yeah.
It's a set of shared values across the organization that people behave in line with.
Yeah, so she said a set of shared values across the organization. And the really important part of what she said as well is that people behave in alignment with. I actually, in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead book, I saw her mentioning that only 10% of the organizations that they studied had actually effectively operationalized their values into actual behaviors, right? And we've all been there. We see the values written, but hey, that's not how my conversation went with the team that I just formed, right? So it's around how we actually do things around here. That's what I would say culture is. Culture is actions. Culture is actions that, yes, come about as a result of belief, but ultimately it's actions. How are we acting in relationship with each other? This is a way to dissect it a little bit further in terms of what are the things that we're looking at when we're trying to determine what the culture of an organization is. So values, yes, what we believe in, and also how those show up in how we actually behave with each other. The norms, how we choose to behave, the things we should never do, right? Because they're taboo in the organization and we find out very quickly. So for some that might be, you know, going to the divisional head of another unit when you're three rungs in a different position. That could be taboo potentially. It's also the things that we choose to celebrate, right? Like, what do we choose to celebrate? That says something about the culture of an organization. I heard a really interesting podcast just recently. Ben Horowitz has just written a book that is called something like Who We Are. Oh, of course, now I can't remember it. What we do is who we are. How to shape culture in organizations. What we do is who we are. And so he was talking about how one of the ways when we're trying to shift an organization's culture, if we start a new rule that encourages people to ask questions about that rule, that's a powerful way to get people exploring how do we do things around here. So his example, he works in like a venture capital firm, and their rule was we are never late for meetings with our entrepreneurs, our startup founders. Never, never, never. And that was to show that in that culture, the behavior was entrepreneurs were their total reason for being. So we have to treat them with that level of respect. So having a rule, whether that's at your project team level or at your organizational level, that helps to communicate what we value and how we want to and choose to behave around here. So when we're looking for culture, it's all those things around how do we make decisions, how do we collaborate, how do we innovate, how do we make change happen. All of those are going to come about in different ways in different organizations based on the culture, which is a very powerful part of any organization. So if we want to change it then, what do we do? How do we do that? How do we help to move an organization toward greater agility if that is the desired end goal in terms of the culture? So I would say some simple questions can certainly help to guide us. The first being, where are we now? So, I had you do a 3 to 5 word kind of reflection, but that could also be some sort of a survey, or that could also be some strategic conversations around what's happening in our VUCA world. What are the forces of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in our world that we need to not only be prepared for, but get out in front of? And what kind of a culture do we need for us to actually achieve that? What kind of behaviors do we need to be both valuing and encouraging and demonstrating in order to actually meet the needs of the environment that we're within? And then some choices in terms of how will we get there? How will we get from where we are right now? And what are the leverage points? Like, what are the most important things that if we change that, it actually has a ripple effect on some of the other parts of the organization? And again, back to project teams, right? If we can be introducing some of these new ways of behaving within a project team context, then it can help us to start a little bit smaller and spread it a little like a virus, a positive virus, a good virus. Yeah. And so getting it down to those granular behaviors. What are the behaviors that will be key to our success in helping to shift the culture? And so when I talk through some examples a little bit later, you'll see that the way we do it, context is everything in terms of the choices we make as far as the way we do it. Like, is this a leap we're trying to take, or is this more of an incremental change we're trying to take? And so context is everything when it comes to organizational change and cultural change. So then how will we align? Like, how will we have the same messages being communicated at different levels of the organization? And how will we show that consistency between what we say we want and what we are actually valuing and telling stories about and demonstrating in the way in which we relate to each other? So, so I've mentioned agility several times now. And so I'm going to show you now one model that relates to some of the behaviors and aspects that would be in place in an organization that was consistently demonstrating agility. And so this is one model, and it's by no means the only one, and it may in fact relate to some of the values and aspirational things that exist within your organization. So as we go through this model, I would like you to keep your touch point as, okay, what were my 3 words at the beginning? And what would I like my 3 to 5 words to be a year from now? What would I like them to be a year from now or 2 years from now? I'm going to show you some aspects of the behaviors here. And again, it's here as an example to help you see how agility, what it can look like. So This is organizational agility versus agile methodology, right? Agile practices. And so this is a model that was developed by Dr. Nick Horney. I did have the opportunity to work with him on a project, and he developed this back in early 2000s, and it can be used in a number of ways. So it can be used as a little bit of a way of looking at leadership behavior. It can be used as a way of looking at team behavior, and it can be used at organizational levels too. And so there's education and learning that goes along with it. So there are 5 core elements to the model. So one is, how good are we at anticipating change? How good are we at continually sensing what's going on in the environment, finding the patterns, making sense of it, and actually taking action on it? The second one is generating confidence around how do we engage with other people? How do we align with other people within the organization so that people are bought into the changes that we might need to make? Initiating action. So how much do we analyze and like continually analyze and worry about the risks of things versus being ready to experiment a little? Liberating thinking, which is around creativity, and how do we really make innovation a key part of the agenda, and then evaluating the results of all that. And you see it's a cycle, right? It's a continuous loop. It's not, you need aspects of all to be truly agile. And you'll also notice that it's got people, process, and technology in the center. So it's not just about how the people are acting. It's about how are our processes reinforcing this agility, how is the technology helping to enable that agility as well. So as we go through, I'm going to dig into each of them real quickly, and as we go through that, I'd like you to reflect on, of these, which would be some current strengths or maybe some potential development areas within the group, the sort of sphere of influence that you have in your mind this morning. So the first one is anticipating change, so seeing and interpreting trends and their implications, and there are 3 different behaviors associated with that. And so visioning, oh, these are a little off, but you get the picture. Visioning, creating a really clear picture as best as possible of what the future that we're moving toward intentionally is going to look like, recognizing trends and patterns, and considering a variety of diverse sources, right? So we need to obviously be looking outside of our own sector, our own industry. We always need to be scanning outside of that so that we can really see opportunity that maybe others haven't seen yet within our industry or sector. A good example of this that I saw recently is a group that decided to just start a future wall in their department, and it invited everybody in the group to just post like headlines and articles and information. It doesn't have to be a physical wall. This was. It could be a spot where you're just always sharing interesting new things that you've discovered that are happening outside of the organization. So again, with this one, I think it's a little bit of how much as an organization are we focused on inside out versus outside in, right? How much are we scanning? The next one is generating confidence, which is really about leveraging the energy of people in a diverse group or in diverse areas of the organization. And this is the work of projects, right? This is the work of projects. So how do we connect? How do we influence ourselves and others toward really effectively meeting the strategic objectives of the project or the organization? How are we enabling that through the way in which we have conversations? How much are we continually trying to align? Like how much are we noticing what's going on and adjusting? So again, that's agile practice, right? That's that iterative approach. So how much are we doing that, not just within projects, but within the organization as a whole? And engaging. Some people talked about how the person leaping had to have some support. You know, you can do this. some belief that he was going to be able to make that jump across the chasm. And so how do we have conversations that help to spark that commitment and productivity and give people the confidence that they can do it? The next one then is initiating action. So again, it's this idea that we have to think about how quick are we and how ready are we to act without full information, to be able to not be too afraid, to try things, to experiment. And so a culture with organizational agility is going to naturally have a bias for action. They're going to be able to quickly notice those opportunities that we talked about in the first part of this, anticipating change, have quick conversations on them, explore them, and then be willing to evaluate collaboratively, what are we going to do about this? So it's not ignoring that risk, it's having conversations that will help us to move forward despite it. And this one also incorporates collaboration. So as you look at these ones, like, are there any of these that you would say are already a strength for your team or your organization? And are there some of them that maybe are getting in the way a little bit, and they're ones that you'd like to experiment with and leverage within perhaps a project team that you're a part of? Liberating thinking. So this is the one that's all about innovation. So a bias for innovation, a real supportive context for unconventional approaches, things that will challenge the status quo, a willingness to do that, to embrace that, and it gets back to that CEO survey where they said, yeah, we're okay with mistakes. Mistakes are fine. We want them to be fine. So again, this would be something where we would want to look at, how much are we customer focused? How much are we truly embracing idea diversity, or doing things a little more the way we typically have over time? Okay, maintaining a strong focus and feedback system. So that continually evaluating what's working, what's not. And I love how one of these three is real-time feedback. I've been in so many organizations where real-time feedback, people struggle with it. People go and talk to somebody else about what the problem is, instead of having a conversation that is exploratory around, here's what just happened, here were the impacts of what just happened, what are some other ways we could have approached it, or we might want to choose to approach it, where feedback is a conversation. It's an exploratory conversation around the so what of something that's happened. So, guiding that continuous improvement in a way that includes real-time feedback, as well as data, fact-based measures as well. So being really clear in terms of expectations as well as feedback. And monitoring, where are we now? And again, it's not a linear process, it's more of an ongoing, if we're acting from using these kinds of behaviors from all 5 of the areas as much as possible, it's going to help our organization to be faster and more flexible and more agile. If you're interested in more on that, him and Tom O'Shea wrote a book called Focus, Fast, and Flexible, and it goes into a bit more detail around these elements of organizational agility. So I'd like to just share a few examples of how, through the use of projects or teams, organizations chose to try to nudge and push their organization toward greater agility. So the first one is a large bank, and I'm allowed to mention the name of the bank. It's CIBC. It happened back 2010-11. The CIO recognized the potential power of Agile methodology for projects. At the time, they were using primarily the waterfall methodology in pretty much all aspects of the bank. And as you can imagine, sometimes bank cultures can be a little slow moving, slow to make change sometimes. And so he saw this as a way to get better at projects and be more responsive, because especially with some of the longer ones, by the time it was ready, things had changed a fair bit in that volatile environment. And he also saw it as an opportunity to help to shift the culture through introducing this new approach of Agile on the projects. So he recognized that it was important to be successful early on. And so he decided, they thought about which of the kinds of projects would be most suited to having a successful experience with introducing Agile methodology. And so they decided to do it in wholesale banking projects. And the reason was because typically these were the creation of the algorithms, which were a part of the outcome of some of these projects, needed to happen quickly. And also the degree of impact within the number of people who would ultimately be affected by it was smaller. So 6 to 8 people had to get into production really quickly. And so this was a great opportunity to test it there. Because as you can imagine, if they'd chosen to test it in retail banking, where you've got like tens and 20,000 people ultimately affected, it may not have been as easy, and there's a lot of change management and learning and things that need to go along those kinds of projects. So they decided to start it there. And what they noticed initially is they had the developers and the testers actually working in 2 different parts of the organization, 2 different places. And so they needed this speed of iteration and feedback. And so they brought the people to work in the same room. And at first, when they went into the same room, they thought, okay, well, the developers will sit over here and the testers will sit over there. Silos were alive and well. And they decided, no, we're going to intermingle. We're going to intermingle. And so it helped them, obviously, to cut down on a lot of the back and forth and the time wasting that can occur when you're working in separate areas, because now they could just lean over and say, hey, I just tried this. Is that going to work? And it really sped up the cycle. So they were successful with the projects that they started with this, and they started to see the changes in behavior as well, right? Which culture is actions, culture is behavior. So the way in which people both understood each other's work, the way in which they communicated with each other started to change. And the morale of the team went up really high too, because it's that I got to the other side of that leap, and they felt good about the success and the speed of success that they were having. So at first they thought, well, let's keep this team together. They're rocking it. They're really great. And then they thought, no, we don't want to do that, because we want to be a virus. We want to be a positive virus within this organization. All the things you talked about, how project teams are such a great vehicle for culture change. So they split them up and had them then integrating this approach into other teams as well. So that's one example where start with some teams and then look at how do you spread the new behaviors and show success with the new behaviors. The second one is a leading retail who I will not name, and very, very successful retailer. Year-over-year growth. Can't do anything wrong. Totally bricks and mortar still. So this was the project I had an opportunity to work with Nick on. And so what it involved was, it was actually the sourcing and procurement group of this major retailer. They recognized that, things were shifting, and at some point they were probably going to need e-commerce for that organization. They were working with business unit heads who really liked their suppliers that they used and didn't really want to change those suppliers too much because they had a confidence and a trust, a relationship. So the global procurement and sourcing group, the VP of that group decided, look, we've got to help to move this change forward within our organization. We've got to become more agile ourselves and be a model for how our business units can become more agile. And so, so they decided to start with that division, that group. They did it as they began exploring the VUCA that they were facing, the different volatility and uncertainty factors that were coming into play in their industry. And they did an assessment, basically. They had everybody in the group respond to an assessment of these various factors of agility. And based on that assessment, they brought the groups together in sort of like-minded, initially, groups of people who had similar roles. And they brought them together to review the collective results, both of their group as a whole, as well as of their specific team within the group. And they had conversations around, okay, so what are our strengths when it comes to agility in this organization? And where are our vulnerabilities? What do we need to intentionally get much better at for us to actually be able to help move our own group as well as the broader organization forward in agility. So, so they had conversations. They came up with what would agility look like in a scenario like this. So they tried to make it very realistic to true scenarios that sourcing and procurement groups are going to face. What would it look like if we were responding to that situation with agility? What would we be doing differently than what we do now? And how can we demonstrate that in our relationships with our business unit partners as well? So, you know, they focused on the sphere of influence that they had and began to set things in place. They timed it so that it was a couple months before the strategic thinking, strategic planning company-wide, so that they were feeding some of that agility objective into the overall organization too. So they wanted to be a leader. And continuing to shift the culture forward by starting with their own behaviors, starting with what they could do. And then the third one is one that I'm involved with right now, and it is a government-funded service provider, again, who shall not be named. And so this is an organization that has not been as customer responsive as what it needs to be for a whole variety of reasons. It's also an organization that has not been as able to flex and change and actually do things different. The culture is very ingrained. So, so they're in a process, they're still quite early in the process, where they have started with the idea of let's explicitly state what our new values and behaviors need to look like. So they've started, it's a bit more of a top-down kind of approach. And they've started with that, and they're using that as a way of helping leaders to now begin to understand what their roles are in helping to shift the culture. So all of the leaders are going through a set of conversations with each other and learning to help them understand how their role needs to change. And then on top of that, all of the leaders are going to be working on projects that are up to them in terms of what it is that they actually do for the project, with some degree of approval needing to happen. But it needs to be completely aligned with this new cultural direction as well as with the strategic objectives. So they'll be tasked with coming up with the projects, and then they'll have some support, and they will ultimately be effecting change in the organization through how they do things and what they do. And as they do this, they are also intending to ensure that the projects will make a difference to those customers, right? Because again, part of their problem in their culture is a lack of customer centricity. So a different approach, 3 different organizations, all done a little bit differently, all with the idea that, you know, if we want to try to change a culture toward more agility, we have to start with where we are and figure out what can we influence and where are some of the leverage points that we may want to consider changing. So for you've you know, identified your 3 to 5 words at the beginning of this. You've also now had an opportunity to maybe get your head around a little bit around what are some of the behaviors, what are some of the things that agility looks like. And so I would invite you to think now about, for you, what are some things that you can do on the teams that you're a part of that will help to shift your organization toward greater agility, faster decisions, faster speed of impact, more customer focused, whatever it might be. So also, you know, thinking about what can you leverage within your own sphere of influence? How can you start to have different conversations with the people who you are both impacting and impacted by to help identify, you know, where's some of the common energy around things that we need to do differently, and who and what might you need to take along with you on this journey. So with that, I actually have a slide that says questions and discussion. Yeah. Okay, bubble up a question. Oh, here we go. Hi.
So you gave an example of the CIBC, but in the Agile environment, in the Agile methodology, we don't see the role of project manager, but instead we see the Scrum Master or the product owner. So when the organizations are moving from waterfall to Agile methodology, what do you think? The project manager should take the role of Scrum Master, or he should take the role of product owner? So that's the only question I have.
Oh, nice. Okay, so what he was saying is he was talking about how with a bank example, if you're moving from waterfall methodology to agile methodology, the project manager role is not as visible there. It's the Scrum Master. And so he was asking, what do I think in terms of whether a project manager should take on Scrum Master type role versus being more of a project owner type role. And you know, I hate to do this with my first question. However, you guys are the project managers here in the room. I'm not a project manager. So my kind of gut instinct with that is how, as a project manager, can you embrace the agility that's needed for your organization and for the projects? And so some of that will be learning new tools and techniques. But honestly, I'm not sure. What do you guys think the role is for a project manager if agile methodology is being implemented? Any comments around that one? We have a comment. Can we get a mic midway through here? This gentleman. Just pass it on. Okay, speak a bit louder. Yeah. Excellent. That's perfect.
I kind of agree with you. It really depends on the organization. And, like, I mean, you have to work together, and Agile itself means being collaborative, right? So, in my case, I do try to act like a Scrum Master in those cases.
Yeah.
But I could see a product manager or whatever given the appropriate authority given to you by the execs or whoever is in charge, right?
Yes.
So it really depends, but in my case, it works best. Like, I mean, as the Scrum Master, the key things is, like, you know, the meetings and seeing if you can remove obstacles, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I feel that I gravitate towards that.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. So yeah, so again, it depends where you're starting. And really, like if we just take away this idea of Agile needing to be a methodology, Agile is a mindset. We all need to be flexible. And if I say to my organization, oh, well, I'm a project manager and that's what I am, that's not being agile as a person. We all need to keep developing our skills too. So thank you. Thanks for that.
I have a quick question. What's the difference between agility and innovation? Does agility lead to innovation or vice versa?
Okay, thanks. So his question was, what's the difference between agility and innovation? Does agility lead to innovation and vice versa? I would say innovation is a subset of agility, and that agility is beyond just innovating. It's around like, how do we make decisions faster? How do we notice what's going on in our environment faster and see the patterns and trends? So absolutely, innovation is a part of agility. I think if we're agile, we probably can be more successful around innovation. And so I guess they kind of work together and it's a subset. That would be how I'd see it. So thank you all. Thanks for being here today, and thanks for the questions. And I welcome any other conversation and networking I might be able to have with each of you today.